it on? Oh, good morning everybody. My name is Lisa White. I'm the Health Promotion Manager. I have a special guest with me this morning, Mr. Scotty McQuarrie. That's our cat. He's trying to steal my water. No. How you doing out there? How's it going? Is there anyone out there? Is anybody there? Just wondering if you guys can hear me. I know I'm a couple minutes early. Oh well, you can tell me along the way. I'm going to get started. So this morning's coffee break, it is the 21st of May, 10 o'clock Atlantic time. Today's coffee break title or topic of today is anger. We're going to talk about what anger is. We're going to talk about our trigger thoughts, coping thoughts, maybe some strategies on how we can sort of managing angry moments. Just a little bit of a disclaimer. This information that I'm going to talk to you about today is property of the Department of National Defence and Strengthening the Forces. So this information is for the Canadian Armed Forces and the defense team, and it's for people who are 18 years of age and over. So it's not for personal use. It's for your own use to be educated, but it's not for people to use to educate others if you're not trained in this information. Okay, so we're going to talk about anger. I think it's kind of perfect timing. I don't know about you guys, but I'm noticing that a lot more people are starting to get a little more short fused, a little less tolerant. Just even talking to my mom last couple of days, she has been a little angrier and not as receptive to people calling her as much. I mean, she loves getting phone calls, don't get me wrong, but I think that when we're calling her, it's a good thing, but what's upsetting her is that she's not able to be out in public and be able to mix with family and things like that. And I think a lot of us are feeling the same way. The things haven't been the same for the last couple of months, and we're still trying to navigate through this and get to the place where we're moving into our next phase. I think Nova Scotia is probably a little bit behind the other provinces, as we know, because we were the last ones to get COVID-19, so we're moving a little bit slower than others, and I think sometimes people are getting frustrated with watching other provinces open up, and ours isn't quite there yet. But hopefully, if we can have a bit of a conversation about some of this information, maybe I can help you manage those angry moments a little bit more effectively. Actually, the Managing Angry Moments program is one of our Strengthen the Forces programs. It's actually one of my favorite programs to facilitate. I was actually supposed to facilitate one this month for the Canadian Armed Forces. It was supposed to be a weekly thing, but unfortunately with what's going on, we're unable to do full courses. So I thought I'd bring you sort of an hour of information this morning. So let's take a look. So what comes to mind when you think of anger? What is anger? So anger is an emotion. It's usually in response physically, intensity, duration. It's usually oriented towards a real or perceived grievance. And again, it varies in intensity, duration, and frequency, and it's accompanied by physiological and psychological changes. So when we look at what anger is, we can look at sort of three other categories. So we can look at aggression. So what would come to mind if you think of aggression? Aggression is when we are trying to impact harm on another person, whether we intend to be harmful or not. And it's also a behavior with willful blindness as to whether harm would result. So an aggressive behavior is usually the intent to do harm. If we look at submissive behavior, usually submissive, you can kind of relate that to being passive. So people who are passive usually are unwillingly able to stand up for themselves or other people when confronted with conflict, or if there's things sitting unwell with them, they're not able to sort of bring that to the surface or raise the issue. And then we have the assertive behavior. Assertive behavior, assertive communication is when we're usually trying to look towards solving a problem or communicating our needs to another person that is respectful, and sort of you're communicating in a way where when you're not sort of character assassinating somebody else. So why do we get angry? Usually get angry if there's a problem. It usually tells us that there's a problem, and if you look at sort of, I know people talk about the iceberg a lot. You could use an hourglass if you want. But usually if you put anger up here, there's usually other things that are below the surface. So whether it's frustration, fear, filters like hungry, angry, lonely, tired, whether there's an injustice, when our values and beliefs have been compromised, when we have unrealistic expectations, or if our perceptions are not in the proper lens. Frustration of our goals. So if we've set goals for ourselves and we're not meeting those goals, that can cause people to feel angry. If people get hurt, embarrassed, if they're harassed, humiliated, those types of things. If we don't reach our potential, our performance, whether it's at home parenting or with our spouses or at work, that could cause people to feel angry. And if there's a personal attack on someone else, whether it's mental or physical, or even on our own selves. So it's figuring out sort of what makes you feel angry. So when we do this program, we usually get people to sort of track their anger log. So as you would your nutrition or your physical activity. So if you're feeling you're someone who's angry a lot, sort of take inventory of that throughout the week. So whenever you find a moment where you're feeling angry, write it down, write down how you're feeling, and maybe if you get a chance, write down how you responded to a situation. It sort of gives you an idea of how you're feeling and how you're doing when it comes to anger, because everybody's reasons for feeling angry are different. Anger is a symptom of stress. So for a lot of people, if their intensity, duration, and frequency is increasing, it's usually related to stress for a lot of people. I know for myself, being angry is not my default browser. So typically, if I'm getting angry, or if my tolerance is off, or if I'm getting irritable or moody or things like that, it's usually because of a stressful situation, or it could be those hidden issues that are not being met. So sometimes when we're angry, there's usually, and it's the same thing with conflict or anger, sometimes there's a hidden issue or an issue underneath that's really the cause of the anger, right? So it might not be that the dishes aren't done, or the laundry's not done, or certain chores are not done. I may be angry that they're not done, but the underlying issue might be is just that I don't feel like I'm getting the help with those things, right? Or I'm not feeling appreciated. So it's not the matter that they're not done, it's the underlying issues that are underneath there, right? It could go in the opposite. So if I was the one that was doing the chores, looking after the family, and even in the workplace, if I was the one that's taking a lot of the workload and things like that, if the appreciation is not there underneath, sometimes the result for some people is anger. So it really all depends where it sits. So you've got to kind of explore your angry moments, and then what is the cause of that anger. When does anger become a problem? It becomes a problem when it becomes mostly your default browser. So when it's your response most of the time to most people, and if it's your response, the main response most of the time to most people, if it is too intense, if it lasts too long, if it lasts in inappropriate situations, if it has a negative impact on your relationships at home or at work. And it can lead to that aggressive behavior, which we talked about earlier, which is to the intent to do harm. It can also result to submissive behavior. A lot of people have told me when we facilitate this program that when they get angry, they withdraw. They become submissive. But what that does is that bottles things up inside, so that when something else happens, it's usually something small, people tend to go overboard and they have a huge reaction to the situation. So bottling things up and withdrawing can also become a problem if you're not addressing the situation. It was either last week or a couple of weeks ago, I can't remember, when we talked about communication and we talked about the collaborative communication approach, and raising the issue is usually a hard thing for people to do. So when you're finding that you've discovered and you've taken inventory of your angry moments, and you've come to the conclusion that there's some conflict in the home or at work, or there's something that you need to talk about with somebody else, having that ability to raise the issue is usually the hardest thing to do, but having that ability to do that is part of addressing those feelings of anger and then setting the platform to be able to have a conversation, a healthy conversation to navigate through what is the cause of anger for you, and maybe if it's with other people or your spouse or whatever it might be. There are some destructive forms of anger, so as I've mentioned before, it can become a problem with intensity, duration, and frequency, but it can also trigger rumination, submission. It can damage personal relationships. So what I mean by rumination is that rumination that happens when you just can't seem to get something out of your head. And a lot of times people tend to ruminate at nighttime when they're trying to go to sleep. Maybe something's happened throughout the day, and maybe you weren't comfortable with it, or you didn't get through it very well. People tend to ruminate in the evenings, or whenever it might be, ruminating at a time when you should be paying attention, or you should be mindful, or you should be, doing other things, and you're ruminating about something, so that can trigger that. It can trigger distressing emotions like sadness, fear, disappointment, lack of your own self-respect, self-esteem, loss of respect from others. So if you're somebody who's an angry person and you don't manage your angry moments well quite often, and it's causing damage to your relationships, you can lose respect from other people. It can be your family members, your kids, people in the public, or your family or your people at work. It also can have an impact on our health, just like with stress management. As we know, stress and anger, there's a relationship between the two, especially when it comes to escalation, and I'll talk to you a little bit about that in a second. Stress is a symptom, or anger is a symptom of stress, and so it can impair your immune system. And people who are angry a lot and having those angry moments is not necessarily always seen. So it's not always verbal. Sometimes it can be very internal for some people, and that can have the same impact as if it was verbal. Both go hand in hand. It does increase levels of cortisol, and as we know, that's a stress hormone, and with the increase of cortisol, it can also have health consequences, and it can cause weight gain around your midsection. It can intense chronic pain. So as we know, as a form of stress management, when we get stressed and strained and we're feeling overwhelmed and we're not doing well, sometimes past issues that you've had physically can return, and mentally, and then sometimes it can lead to chronic pain for some people. Increased risk of death from cardiovascular disease and anxiety and depression. So when we look at sort of the symptoms of stress, we have anger up in there and many others. There's physical, emotional, spiritual, behavioral, mental. There's all kinds of different categories when it comes to the symptoms of stress. But when you think of the effects of stress, and if anger is here, and your intensity, your duration, your frequency, and you are becoming more in the destructive zone for anger, it can lead to the effects of stress down here, and which usually can lead to medical intervention for some people if it gets that bad. And again, the consequences can be damaging for relationships and performance and so on, and health. The constructive forms of anger. So anger is not all that bad. It does tell us, at least it does for me, that there usually is a problem. Okay, there's something going on. If I get angry and I have a little bit of an outburst to anyone, they're usually surprised by that, and it usually does tell a lot of people that there's something wrong, there's a problem, whatever it might be. So that's a good thing, because anger is an emotion, and we're not trying to tell you not to get angry. We're trying to tell you that how do you want to manage that anger when you are angry, and is anger becoming a problem? Okay. So if you notice that your anger tolerance is changing, you want to make sure that you take inventory of that so that you can figure out what sort of is going on, and then what do you need to address. And what that also does is it gets you to persevere in the face of injustice. If you're frustrated, if there's a problem, if that little bit of anger can fuel somebody to motivate or propel them forward to handle those types of situations. I know that when I get to a point when I'm feeling angry, it's time for me to take action and do something about it. It does activate psychological resources like determination in the face of fear. It does protect our self-esteem, our self-motivation, our self-concept. It can create energy to resolve conflict. Okay, I mentioned that already. Accomplish a task, whether right or wrong. So there are some constructive forms of anger, and that we're not saying don't get angry, it's how you're managing that, and if you're taking care of yourself when you are angry. So key points to remember when we're talking about anger is don't ever expect never to feel angry. It's not realistic. Focus is what you think, say, and do, and after you feel angry. So what do you do before and after you're feeling angry? So we're going to talk about thinking skills model, which will talk about how you're thinking in certain situations, which leads to your physical sensations, your emotions, and your behavior, because your thought process can lead to how you behave. And again, we want to manage those angry moments. So if the emotion there is anger, let's see what the behavior is going to look like. So what's your thoughts around that? It can be an emotion, you can feel angry, but what are your coping thoughts when you are angry? Because that's going to help you lead to your behavior, and we're going to talk a little bit about that. Through anger management and managing angry moments, you can learn to become less reactive and more responsive when faced with a potential anger situation. And sometimes when we take a look at some of the things that are causing us to feel angry, we can sort of work on some of those and reduce those situations. For example, road rage, or people who are driving. This comes up all the time in every class. Valley drivers, right? That always comes up in our class. People get frustrated out on the roads because some people, and I'm not, this is what they're telling me, I'm not saying this, some people say in the valley, people tend to think that they can take turns turning, and that they don't have to follow the stop sign rules and things like that. It's like, okay, now it's your turn, and now it's your, but that, you know, and things like that, and slow and fast, and whatever it might be. So for some people, driving in the valley is a huge problem for them. So sometimes they'll work on that first, and it's not actually the driver's, it's actually your choice to feel angry about it. So what we get some of the guys to do is to sort of change their thought process around something that's happening when they're driving. For example, if somebody cuts you off, okay, so rather than trying to be abrasive or, you know, give them the finger or whatever it might be, or swear or get mad and have your heart rate and everything else go up, you use that sort of thought process and say everybody makes mistakes, right? So you're trying to self-talk to yourself to keep yourself from getting angry every time something goes wrong when you're on the road. So you get yourself to reduce some of those situations. Because if your default browser is getting angry at a lot of things, you got to take some of them out of the equation so that it's not intensity, duration, and frequency of anger, right? Another thing to keep in mind, I'm going to go into that a little bit more in a second. Another thing to keep in mind is no one makes you angry. Responding in anger is a personal choice. Sometimes people tend to go have a good discussion in class about that, saying, no, what they're doing there, that's wrong, and that's making me angry. But that's your choice to feel anger about certain situations. You make that decision to do that. And that's something that we tend to have a great discussion on in class when we are in class. I don't know if, what, Kenny? You're laughing at me, what's happening?
Nothing.
Oh, we have to have that moment, right? Yeah, that's good. Thanks for handling with me. Can you see that? I don't know if you guys can see this or not. Here. So what I'm doing here is I'm sort of trying to relate anger, stress, and mental fitness. So this over here is sort of an event that happens. Okay, so we're looking at stress, and we're looking at a stressor. So there's internal and external stressors. So over here, I know this isn't a car accident you see every day, but this could be an event that happens to somebody. So you experience an event. Stress can be caused by either the outside events, like the demands of circumstances, or inner thoughts or feelings about this event. Okay, so what happens is there's an event, it goes into your mental filter in here. In this one here, that is where we interpret and judge the situation. And here is how we talk to ourselves about the situation. So in here, we're sort of making meaning of what has just happened here. We're interpreting, we're judging it. And how we look and think about this situation can lead to whether we manage stress or we don't manage stress well. If we're not managing the stress well, this is usually where anger results. So if you're not able to remain calm during this type of a situation, how you talk to yourself about this situation could lead to whether you're here or here. So some of the things you might say to yourself here that would lead to up here could be in relation to other things that are also going on in your life. So if you've got a lot of stressors going on, if, let's say for example, you had relationship issues, you were worried about money, parenting, you had conflict in the workplace, you were busy that day, you had a lot of chores to do, you were trying to get somewhere, and this happens, and then your thought process is, this is a catastrophe, right? And you're up there and you're in escalation and you're thinking about all these negative thoughts, that could lead to you not managing stress effectively. If in fact in here, if you can talk to yourself and try to remain calm and talk about the situation to yourself and say maybe, I've got insurance, everybody's okay, nobody's hurt, and try to keep yourself in a place where you are not escalating too high, you may be able to manage your stress more effectively. So it's all to how you talk about a certain situation. So your response is based on your interpretation, which results in effectively managing your anger well or not, right? And it could have consequences depending on how you do. Thinking skills model. I don't know if you've seen this before, and if you can't read it from where I'm sitting, I love this. I love this model because I find that it really helps me understand my emotions and how I behave in certain situations. So the first thing that happens here is there's a situation, okay, and it's all about your thoughts about the situation, or how you're thinking about the situation, and things can impact that. Okay? Your values and beliefs, your attitude, your filters. Filters meaning, are you distracted? Are you overwhelmed? Are you busy? Are things going on right now that you don't have time for this? Halt, hungry, angry, lonely, tired. Your attitude. So your thinking process could be can be construed by your values and beliefs and things like that. So it does have an impact, is what I'm trying to say here, on your thinking. So sometimes in certain situations, especially if you're, you have to check yourself. So one of the things that bothers me the most is lack of fairness. My parents did a really good job. Well, they did their best growing up. There was 3 of us kids. They tried to make sure that things were fair. And I am a manager, and I try to make sure that things are fair amongst the people that I'm managing. So if I see things that are not fair, whether it's in society, whether it's at my workplace, depending on where it is, that has an impact on my thinking, right? That can tend to make me feel angry. So I have to be aware of that, because if I want to check that at the door to manage through a situation, I have to make sure that I'm aware of that so I'm not escalating when I'm trying to have a conversation with somebody. So your thoughts can impact the situation. When we have how we think about the situation is going to impact our physical sensations. So what is your response when you get angry? What physically happens to you when you feel anger or you feel stress? And that's important to recognize. There's a lot of things that come to mind. For some people, their mouth goes dry, they get shaky, their heart rate goes up. Some people grind their teeth at night when they're sleeping. Glaring, clenched fists, choking. I don't know, that's a bad one. Choking, twitching, sweating, feeling hot, feeling cold, goosebumps, heart rate up, chills, shudders, whatever it might be. So it's important that you recognize what your physical sensations are so that you know that you are escalating or that you're having a thought about a certain situation. It can lead to your emotions, okay, which can tend to lead to your behavior. So I think I talked about this. I don't even know which briefing it was. It might have been the communication one that I talked to you about. If you're looking at a situation and you're thinking negatively about it, you're probably having a negative emotion about it, like anger. Anger's not always negative, but you know what I mean. And then your behavior can be the impact of that. So they kind of are a little bit of a checklist that you can use when you're trying to sort of figure out what situations are causing anger for you. This is really good to use as a log throughout the week. So like next week, what you could do is just grab yourself a piece of paper, and if you come across a situation where you felt anger, you should write it down. Write down the situation, write down your thoughts about the situation. If you could think about any physical sensations that you might have had, what your emotion was, and what your behavior was. If you got through that situation well, that's a good thing, because then you can log that this is how I got through that situation. But if you didn't get through that situation well, and you're not happy with how you got through it, the next part would be to look at strategies. Okay, so what are some things that I can put in place to manage that situation better? Because I wasn't happy with how I handled that situation. So what were the emotions attached to that? What caused the anger? And what do you think you could do better next time to sort of manage through that more effectively? Okay, so this thinking skills model is really important. It goes hand in hand with this, okay? Because here we have to recognize, if I can do that, I don't know if you can see, but the situation is the event, okay, the car. The interpretation and the judgment in there is our thoughts. And in around that interpretation and judgment, that's what would cause our physical sensations and our emotions, which will lead to the red or the green on how we behave or how we respond in that situation. So that's sort of how those two relate to each other. This is interesting, another interesting piece of information. This is called the anger mountain diagram, and it illustrates the physical escalation cycle that happens when fight or flight response kicks in. Okay, so this is how we relate anger and our thinking. Okay, so the first one right here, okay, when we look at that, as we get triggered and we escalate, our anger goes up. And at the bottom down here, as we get triggered and we escalate, our thinking goes down. So as our anger comes up to a crisis phase, our thinking is at its lowest. So our anger is at its highest, our thinking is at its lowest. And so usually when we get to this point, we usually say and do things that we tend to have negative consequences or we regret later on. After the situation, our anger tends to decrease, so it comes down. And as our anger comes down, our thinking is coming up. Okay, so our anger is going down, our thinking is coming back. Okay, so where we kind of want to be is we kind of want to be somewhere over in here and down. Okay, we want to be at a place where we're calmer so that our thinking is pretty much still intact so that we can be in a problem-solving situation. Because if we're in a trigger phase, this is usually when an argument happens. I don't know if you guys can hear me because I have the paper in front of my face. Can you hear me okay? Okay. It's only because I want you to see this. So usually in the trigger phase, an argument or a physical attack of information may trigger in this phase. Okay, sort of like the situation over here. Okay, it could be an event too that happens, or it could be that you're getting in a confrontation or something like that with somebody and things are escalating, you're starting to get into an argument. Okay, usually over in here we feel the threats of that argument or that attack or that event, and it can trigger us emotionally, psychologically, and physically. Okay, so sometimes we tend to freeze at this point to assess the situation. Okay, we freeze and assess, but if we're interpreting that situation in a way that is negative, or if our emotion is leading us towards a negative behavior, then we tend to move up into escalation. Okay, so in an escalation phase, this is usually where our body's arousal system tends to happen. So this is where we feel those physical sensations. So if we are sort of paralleling this to the thinking skills, in here, right here, that's the situation, okay? And our thinking and our physical sensations are kind of all in here. Our thinking and assessing is sort of here, and now our physical sensation and thinking is still here. Okay, so our blood pressure goes up. Something always distracts me. Our blood pressure goes up, our heart rate goes up, you know, those, your mouth goes dry, or those sort of physical sensations that you feel. Me, if I get into a confrontation with somebody, I immediately have a complete dry mouth. I can't even swallow because that's my reaction, right? So this is where things tend to escalate here in this phase. This, right in here, this is the time actually where we need to put some of our strategies into place. And one of the first things they talk about in here is timeout. So if you find that you're escalating, look, your anger's going up, your thinking is going down. So right in here, this is the time when you should take a timeout. Take a break. And when you take a timeout, especially if you're taking a timeout with a spouse or a coworker, just say something like, I need to take a few minutes to take a timeout. Just make sure that you let the person know that you want to take a time in, but you need a timeout right now, and you can determine how long you want to take that. But you need to take a timeout, go away, and do something healthy for yourself before you time back in. Don't go away in a timeout and ruminate yourself and build yourself up, because if you do that, you'll go back in and you'll be in the same spot. Okay, so you want to, when you're in a timeout, you want to go and you want to calm yourself down. And if you watched our last video on communication, there's a lot of things that you can do at that point to sort of de-escalate yourself. You can sort of write things down in your own timeout. Take a break. Some people might go and exercise, go for a walk, take a bath, and that's great. But before you time in, you want to prepare yourself for this triggered situation or what's going on. You want to go back into the situation and prepare yourself in a way in which you can handle or problem solve that situation without continuing up into the crisis phase. So whether you sit down and you write down the things that you want to say to yourself, I don't want to be aggressive in this situation, or I don't want to be submissive in this situation. Aggressive people have a very easier time to go all the way up here. Submissive people, people who withdraw, they tend to just take themselves out of the situation. Or they'll let the other person just carry on as they just don't get engaged in the conversation. So take that time out, prep yourself to go back into the conversation when you have to. Do the work, okay? Decide what you want to say. Get your assertive sort of messages there, and do your self-talk and say, this is a problem that I want to resolve with somebody else. Pop the problem out of the box and try not to get personal. When you get personal up in here, people tend to get personal when they get to the crisis phase, and I'll get there, because people tend to forget about the problem and they start getting personal, and I'll talk about that in a sec. But in here, this is where you want to reevaluate and keep yourself focused on the problem and focused on problem solving, okay, and protecting the relationship of the person that you're talking with, okay, because you don't want your thinking to go any further down here, okay, because when it gets to that crisis phase, this is where the fight or flight tends to kick in here. This is when people tend to say and do things that they usually regret after. They also tend to do and say things that they don't mean because they're trying to win the conversation. Usually up in here too, when our thinking's down and our anger is at its height, people are not listening to the other person either. All they're doing is thinking about what they want to say next without taking the time to listen to the other person, tell them what's going on. Okay, they're thinking about their next response. Here, too, if there's past issues that have happened in the relationship or the friendship or in work or wherever it might be, then we start bringing in other stuff, right? Let's bring something in that happened 5 years ago. Let's bring that into the conversation. Let's bring other hurtful things in there, because we're at a place here, anger's at its height, thinking's at its lowest, and people are going to say and do things to win that conversation, right? People are not listening at this phase, and they don't have any concern, and they don't notice the consequences of their behavior at this point. So when the situation settles down and our anger starts to decrease, okay, we get into this sort of a cool down phase. So our temperature, our blood pressure, our heart rate, The body begins to recover from the situation here. We start to recover from all the stress and energy that we put in up here. As you can see, as our anger is decreasing, our thinking is kind of returning. So people are going, uh-oh, right? They're starting to realize some of the things they might have said, and now we're starting to place a little bit of judgment. The judgment and interpretation of just went on here is starting to come back. You're not just doing that for yourself and what you said, you're also thinking about what the other person said too as well, and how that conversation went and how maybe potentially hurtful that went. And sometimes in here, this too also, when you take a timeout over here, the cool down phase can happen. So we can sometimes skip over this. Okay, so if I'm over an escalation, okay, and I said, okay, I need to take a timeout, skip, now I'm going to cool down in this phase. So in this phase, it's important that we don't return to the conversation until we feel more relaxed and we feel that our judgment is back, we're clear, we're thinking straight, we feel calm, we feel ready to talk about the situation. At least an hour, okay? It can be longer for some people to cool down before they go back into the escalation, before they go back into the problem-solving situation. Okay, so there's a different ways we can navigate through this. So as we trigger this at the beginning, we get triggered, our anger goes up, we escalate, we get to this crisis phase, our thinking goes down. Okay, after that is over, we can go through the cool down, okay, and go into the depression phase, which I'll talk about. But if we've been triggered and we escalate and our thinking is going here and we decide to skip over and take a cool down, we can go back down to, we can skip and go right over here into problem solving. Okay, I'm hoping not confusing you too much. But if you take that cool down, that's what can happen there. So there's two types of cool down. Cooling down from being in the crisis phase, or cooling down from escalating and saying, oh, I gotta go and I gotta cool myself down here and get myself down to a place of balance before I go back into the situation, because I want to avoid this, right? So as we're cooling down, see, our thinking is starting to come back. Okay, when we're thinking clearly and our anger is coming down, we're able to problem solve a lot better. In the depression phase here, the body enters a short period in which adrenaline and heart rate slip below normal as the body regains balance. Feelings of exhaustion for some people set in over in here. Awareness returns to consciousness, and examination of behavior leads to feelings for some people of guilt, regret, and depression. Okay, so if you're feeling those regret and the depression and the guilt and things like that, that's when you want to sort of re-engage with the person you went into a crisis phase with using this, okay? Because you got to figure out, before you go back into the situation, you want to figure out how you're judging and interpreting the situation, because you want to manage stress and you want to be at a state of balance when you are going into that conversation with that person. So you kind of want to look at your mental filter, okay? You also want to look at this, okay? This is also the situation which I just brought up. But what are your thoughts about the situation? What is impacting your thinking? Is it past hurts? Is it past experiences that you've had? Is it your values and beliefs that have been sort of compromised? Are your interests or your expectations not being met? Are your needs not being met? Do you have filters that are, or distractions? Are you overwhelmed with stress? So you want to sort of take inventory, evaluate the situation or the conflict or the problem that you are addressing with that individual or person or group of people, okay, before you go back. Because if you're feeling guilt and remorse and depression and things like that, you want to make sure that you can go back and sort of sort through that again. And maybe make amends with somebody, right? Go back in and say, okay, maybe I didn't handle the situation appropriately and I want to take ownership. Be able to take ownership of how you handle the situation and say, listen, I didn't do so well the last time we tried to talk about this. I ended up, we ended up in a place where my thinking wasn't at its best. And I was very angry at the time. And when I was very angry and I wasn't thinking at my best thinking, I said and did things that I regret. And I still want to solve this problem with you. So I want to try and do this again. And when you go back into the situation and you want to talk to the person about it, you want to go back to intercom, what I talked about. If you should go and watch, if you didn't watch it, watch my last video, because it is on communication. That is where you want to set up a time with the individual, a time when you both agree on, and that's where you want to go into the conversation with some ground rules, with some strategies. Okay, strategies that you can use if your anger tends to escalate at that certain time. I guess the first one we talked about was taking a timeout. That's a big one for situations like this. And just remember, just because you're going back into a conversation doesn't mean you have to solve the problem all in one conversation. If it is very important and it's very emotional for you, just set timelines to the conversation that you want to have. Say, listen, let's talk about it at this time, and let's agree that if it's going past a certain amount of time that we park it, and then we can return to it at a time that's best suited for us, because you want to prevent this from happening. Okay, so maybe your timeout might be 24 hours, right? You might say, okay, I want to stop at this point, and tomorrow, can we agree to come back at the same time and continue on with this? Because you want to have assertive conversations. You want to have them as best that you can, because you want to be able to get your needs out there and your ideas and your thoughts in a way that's respectful. Okay? So let's talk about strategies. Can you sip of your coffee or water? Oh, before I get there, I forgot. One more thing. We are going to get to strategies, but something to keep in mind. What are trigger thoughts? I talked about trigger thoughts. Okay, trigger thoughts escalate one's emotions, as we saw with those diagrams that I showed you. Physical sensations and actions, so they escalate. So trigger thoughts escalate all that. They create a reactive response to stressful situations. Note the word in there, reactive response. When we react, it's usually quicker, and it's usually with our emotions, our physical sensations and all that escalated, and that causes a reaction, which is usually a crisis phase, right? We'll talk about response in a minute. So trigger thought examples would be things like, he's always ignoring me. I'm sick of having to tell him over and over again to turn off the TV, or whatever it might be. He's always disrespectful. So using those always and most of the time and every time, and that word always is a big one in there. You always do that. That can be a very triggering thing to say to somebody. Okay? Then we look at coping thoughts. Okay? Coping thoughts are great because they're easy. You can pick what you want, and if you can use them and they work, and you pick certain ones in certain situations, they can be good. Coping thoughts usually de-escalate our emotions, our physical sensations, and our actions. Okay? They allow for a calmer response to a stressful situation. Like I used in the example before. When someone cuts you off, your trigger thought could be, what an asshole, right? That's a trigger thought. And I'm sorry about the language, it's 18 and over, right? But in reality, that's what sometimes people say. Okay, they have that slang, that trigger thought response. And so a coping thought might be, stay calm, everybody makes mistakes. Okay, so you're trying to keep yourself calm. Every time you trigger yourself, you're triggering yourself to escalate, which triggers the fight or flight response. And if you don't have any coping mechanisms in escalation, they can build up. So, asshole, you just cut me off. And then something else happens and you are triggered and escalating. You have you have a trigger thought in a lot of things that happen to you, which can cause that escalation and build up, which can tend to lead to a crisis response, not just because of it's one person, it's a build up of all these types of things that have happened throughout the day, and then you have that boom at the end of the day or whatever it might be, and 2 days later with that person because you have had all these trigger thoughts. So coping thoughts can de-escalate that. So here's a few other examples. He may not have heard me, or he may have become distracted. I know the one that I used a lot when the kids were younger, and some of you were in my class before, you've heard of this. Ever have to get the kids off the play box or whatever it is, and they're downstairs, and you're upstairs, and you're yelling, "Come up for supper," and nobody's listening. It's crickets, right? And you're yelling, "Supper time," and they're still not coming. And your thought process is, they never listen to me. They disrespect me. They don't care that I just cooked a supper for them. These are all trigger thoughts that you have, right? These are trigger thoughts. These are my thoughts about a situation, right? This is my thoughts about a situation. I'm pissed off, right? I'm frustrated. So I go down and I yell at them. I go down, my behavior is, get off the console, get up there for supper. Like I'm yelling at my kids, right? I don't like that. I don't like that behavior, right? So maybe in a situation like that, instead of thinking those things, I might think, they're playing a game that they like. They don't hear me. The game is loud, right? So I go down. I might be a little bit rattled, but nothing too serious because I know they can't hear me. They're kids. They're playing a game. It's important to them. Instead, I go down and go, click, supper time. Oh, Mom, supper time. Okay, and the kids come up the stairs. What a different response to me going down there in the first response. Okay, so that is recognizing. So I put some coping mechanisms in there to sort of keep myself in a place that I could go down and handle that situation better than if I had trigger thoughts in there. Okay, trigger thought or a stressor plus a trigger thought is an anger generating situation. A stressor and a coping thought is a problem solving situation, if you can think of it that way. Some other things that you might pick: just stay cool. Okay, just relax. It's not that important to you. What will this mean in 5 hours, 5 days, 5 weeks, 5 years? Some people use that one. This is not a disaster. It's not the end of the world. It's just spilled milk. It's just the glass broken on the floor. Like, it's not a big deal. Everybody's okay. My anger is a signal of something that I need to do something. So I'm feeling this. Okay. This means I need to do something here. This means I might have a problem, or I need to take action or do something about a situation. Okay? That's when you take inventory. You say, okay, I'm angry. I need to take action. I need to do some, I need to have some coping thoughts and some assertive communication in there when I go into the situation. Okay? Once this can become your default browser over time. I'm not saying you'll always do it, but as you practice this, I can remember, when I wasn't practicing things like this and had, I'd be sitting in a lineup, usually at Canadian Tire, and I apologize, I love Canadian Tire, but at Canadian Tire at a time when you're trying to return something. I don't know if you've ever had to do that. And I'm in a lineup, and I'm like, and it's all these negative, and then I finally get through it, and then I walk out just not happy, right? Well, if I just choose to think, I got lots of time, I'm not going anywhere, I can always come back, right? And then I just go through that situation a lot differently than if I sit there and moan and groan and complain and do all this, because I walk out of the store and a different person, right? Because if you're always doing this growling and grunting and everything every time you're going into a situation, that becomes that negative lens, that default browser. It can have an impact on your health and your relationships, your ability to handle escalation. When things tend to get escalated, that has an impact, right? Using those coping thoughts can keep you calmer. It takes practice like anything else. Practice your coping thoughts. Pick the ones you like. Google them. There's lots of them out there. Use the one that you think would be best for you. So we've got a couple of strategies. Taking a timeout and coping thoughts. Using coping thoughts in certain situations. So you can use coping thoughts for other people, right? I sometimes do that with my kids or my husband. Like, something will happen and I will go, oh, well, it's just this, so it's not a big deal, right? I tend to sometimes put coping thoughts into other people's thoughts because, excuse me, not only may it help the other person, but it's helping me at the same time because I'm actually saying it out loud, right? So you can use those coping thoughts for other people and to help yourself at the same time. Okay, I only got a few more minutes. So other strategies you can use, avoidance and escape strategies, okay? These can be used to reduce the tension created in dealing with anger-generating situations, okay? These strategies are not permanent solution to the problem because the problem has not been solved. So they're not a solution, they're just a strategy to sort of give you time to solve a situation. They're effective in preventing further damage to relationships. Okay, so avoidance and escape strategies, not a permanent solution, but a way in which a strategy that you can use to sort of give yourself some time to prevent further damage. So there's sort of 3 avoidance strategies. These avoidance strategies are most effective with predictable stressors. Okay, things that you know of already that could happen, that could cause anger for you. For example, for some people, it is avoidance by time delays. So the big lineup, our traffic in Greenwood after work, I probably shouldn't even talk about it compared to Toronto traffic, but if that little traffic jam after work, it makes you angry, and it's one of those things that you grind your teeth in as you're sitting in the lineup or whatever it might be, well, just avoid it by using a time delay. Either come into work a little earlier if you can and leave a little bit earlier, right? Or leave a little later and avoid that situation. It's one less trigger for you. It's one less thing that you have to be concerned about. So a time delay. It could also be, people might come up to you and say, I need you to work over the weekend. And I know we're in a chain of command in the military, so you're not going to say, oh, I'll just take the weekend to think about that. I know that can't always happen within the chain of command. I get that, right? You're working on the weekend, that's it. We're doing it, right? But if it was in a place where somebody said you had to do something over the weekend, maybe it's a spouse or something like that, you might be able to say, can I take some time to think about that? If you have opportunities where you can take time to think about a situation before you give a response, that's avoidance by time delays. A planned avoidance. So, I sometimes plan to be away from something if I know that it's a stressor for me or a trigger for me. So I might avoid certain people. Nobody at work, but if there's certain people that tend to trigger me, I just avoid them, right? I just don't put myself in that position to make myself feel that anger at that moment, right? Avoid conversations too, planned avoidance. When people start getting into politics, or this is my personal thing, whether it's politics or religion or topics or whatever that I don't care about, I just take myself out of this. I just plan not to be around that, right? Because it's one less thing I have to get myself tied up in, right? Avoidance by seeking another method. So this provides options where speaking directly with another person may not be productive. Okay, so maybe you might use, they say writing letters in here, but I think most people nowadays use emails or text, but just be careful with that. If you're sending out an email to somebody, you're not sending it out when you are here, right? You're not sending out that email or that text here. And you don't want to send it out if alcohol or substances are involved. Okay, so if you want to say something to somebody and you're having a hard time doing it in person, don't do it here, up in here, right? You want to do it when you're in a calmer place, when you thought about things, think, okay, I didn't like that situation, I feel bad about it, or this is what I feel about a certain situation, so I'm just going to put my words down in thought and I'm going to send it to the person. Okay, so that's one way to do it. And you can also use somebody else. Get somebody to tell the other person, talk to the other person for you on your behalf. Whew, just give myself a head rush doing that. Escape strategies. Disruption. So escape strategies are involve the disruption of angry responses. This strategy is effective for situations that cannot be avoided. Okay, so you're in a situation, you can't get away from it. So how can I use an escape route out of it? You're having a plan more likely to prevent the situation from getting worse, so you can have a planned escape strategy in place. Most of the time you see this on movies where people they're on a date or something like that. Kenny's yawning, so it's getting time for me to be done soon. No, just kidding. It's all good. 5 minutes, I know. I see this in movies a lot, or friends. They'll say like, call me in a half an hour while I'm on the date, right? Oh, there's a fire at home. Oh, I gotta go. So they're planning their escape, right? But as a useful tool ahead of time that a particular encounter is going to occur, one possibility is keeping the time for such meetings to a minimum. So that's a planned escape. So saying I'm only going to do this for 10 minutes, so you're already planning like in 10 minutes, I'm out of here, right? That's my planned escape. Another alternative is having a third-party assistant interrupting a meeting. Edith has done this a few times for me. She's seen certain individuals come into my office, and I like these individuals, don't get me wrong, but they tend to talk for a very, very long time. It's not my coworkers. But anyway, it's just a person that sometimes comes in, and it's a very long conversation. So sometimes Edith will come in 10 minutes and go, don't forget you have a phone call coming in at whatever time. Oh, I'm sorry, I gotta go. Right? So you're planning your escape. You can also use it if you're interacting with someone that triggers you. Okay, so if you know you have to work with somebody that triggers you, you might want to make sure that you ask a friend to support you or that you set a time limit. Distraction is useful if you're likely to dwell on a negative experience. So focusing on pleasant activities such as hobbies or playing sports or can reduce a short-term discomfort. Using a longer-term solution can be put into place until one can be put into place. So distraction is something like working out, going to your hobbies, taking a bath. That's an escape strategy. You know, I just need to go do a deep breathing exercise. I need to go out for a walk. I need to go clear my head. I need to do whatever I need to do. That's a bit of a distraction. Okay? And then we already talked about timeout. So I've kind of given you 7 strategies that you can use. Okay, first of all, in summary, first of all, you gotta recognize this. Okay, you gotta recognize your interpretation of certain events. Okay, how are you looking at those events, and are you managing them well or not? This is a summary. That's the first thing. Okay, and then you're looking at, okay, these are the certain situations that I've been putting myself in where I'm finding that I'm not managing anger well, or these are the situations that I've been in that I haven't managing my anger well. What was my thoughts? Okay, what were my physical sensations? What were my emotions? What was my behavior? Because I need to work on that. But you got to figure out what's going on in certain situations. Okay, which is part of the interpretation part. Then recognizing the 5 stages of Anger Mountain. Okay, recognizing that this is not your best bet to be solved, and when you get up in here, you got to get out of there. Don't let yourself get here. This is not the best place to be resolving conflict or being in a situation, because remember, our anger's at its highest, our thinking's at its lowest. Okay, because as we escalate, anger goes up, thinking goes down. When we cool down, our anger goes down, and our thinking comes back up again. Okay, so understanding that. And then understanding that there are trigger thoughts, okay, and recognizing your trigger thoughts, knowing that a stressor plus a trigger thought is an anger-generating situation. The coping thought, so a stressor and a coping thought, which is our first strategy. Stressor plus a coping thought is a problem-solving situation. So we've talked about coping thoughts. We have escape and avoidance strategies. So we have 3 escape strategies and 3 avoidance strategies that we talked about. Okay, so remembering those 7 that you have so far. That concludes my hour. If you want more information on managing anger moments, I've only given you a snapshot of the program. I know it's a little sketch. It's always hard to get started, I find, in these briefings when you're talking to an iPad on a stand with Kenny blinded, doing dances. But I appreciate your patience in all this. So if you need more information, reach out to us. Our email addresses are on the Facebook page. I feel like I'm up on Monday. So Monday morning, health promotion shorts, and I feel like it's my turn, but it could be Jeanette's, but I feel like it's my turn, and I'm talking about motivation on Monday, because motivation is very difficult right now for a lot of people getting motivated, so I'm up on Monday. But keep an eye on our Facebook page. I will continue to post resources up on there for you, okay? Because if you're struggling with anger or stress, there's a lot of resources that are out there for people, especially for in the community. I have tons of resources. Remember, I usually say this at the end of every video. Remember, we have CAFMAP. Okay, that's the number. That's Canadian Armed Forces Members Assistance Program. 1-800-268-7708. And then we also have our employee family assistance program for MPF employees, and it's 1-844-751-2133. Okay, so reach out and get those resources from myself or from Jeanette or Edith. We're all on our Facebook page. Because if you're not managing anger well, maybe you can tap into some of those resources and sort through that, especially for your families or your children. Also, if your children are struggling with anger and you want to sort of figure out what's going on, tapping into some of those resources are helpful. Last thing I'll say to you on the way out is I did take an anger management class when my kids were 5 and 3. We just first got posted to Greenwood. I went and took anger management at the MFRCs. Back then they ran the program. We run a program now, but you can also go and talk to the MFRCs if your kids are struggling with anger and get some resources from Kim Dixon, because she is responsible for the parenting of children, so you can talk to her for parenting advice, and you can also talk to Caitlin Wolf and Erica Dion. They're counselors over at the MFRC if you're family members, okay? And you can take your children over there. And you can also call CAFMAP. And for our military folks, we have mental health on base. We have the chaplains. And if you want to take some more Managing Anger Moments programs, we don't have full programs, but you can contact myself and I can give you some more information on Managing Anger Moments. Next up on our Facebook page, look for our weekly webinars that are up there right now. We have health promotion managers across the country that are putting up those webinars for you. And Jeanette will post our weekend wellness webinars for you to watch over the weekend. Thanks very much, everybody. Have a great day. Get outside and enjoy the sunshine, and I look forward to seeing you again soon. Next up, Jeanette, next Thursday, top fuel for top performance. How to fuel yourself before, during, and after physical activity. Have a good day. Bye.